I'm here today to present some of the key findings from my PhD research on an exploratory case study of how Adnams collaborates and works with different stakeholders in their wider business ecosystem. I'm a postdoc at Imperial College funded by the Centre for Industrial Sustainability. However, my PhD was co-funded by Climate Kick, so important to give a nod to the people who've made this possible. So I'm going to be talking about why Adnams. You've already heard from Andy Woods, the CEO. I wanted to give you a bit of background about why I thought they were an interesting case, because case selection is so important. For me, it's about the fact that while it may not be explicit in terms of how Andy talks about the company when it comes to B2B stakeholders or in a forum like this, but what I noticed in my engagement with their stakeholders through the duration of my PhD was that ecosystems and the metaphor implicitly informs how they do business. And it's evident in two ways. Explicitly in their investment and implementation of circular economy principles. So they've done a number of things within their operations, like cycling waste, heat, and brewing processes, having designed and invested in a distribution center that doesn't require heating or cooling, and also the anaerobic digester, which is a joint venture, turning waste into energy. However, there's another way where this metaphor is applied, and it partly comes from the constraints around them implementing circular strategies. They're predominantly a brewer, but they're a retailer and a hotelier as well. And there are constraints in the UK system for what they can do, given that, for example, bottle reuse is not possible given that the infrastructure was disbanded in the 1970s. So they're interested in understanding how they can create value with a broader idea around ecosystems. And I came across a teaching case study when I was doing background research on them, which highlighted that the way that they work with their stakeholders illustrates that they see themselves as part of a wider network of businesses, and that the way that they approach working with partners is underpinned by the belief that if the businesses around them thrive, they will also thrive. So for me, one of the key research questions around value creation and collaboration is to do with recognizing that we acknowledge that consumers and producers are not the only stakeholders and the only targets of value creation. That's something that's quite documented in the sustainable business model literature. However, there's still a lot of questions around how value is actually created. And what my research was exploring was the social dynamics. So how do businesses influence each other? How does that influence impact how they create value and the possibilities for value creation? So I did an exploratory qualitative case study. I mapped salient stakeholders. They have thousands of stakeholders. So I did a number of exercises to understand from Adnams' perspective who were the key stakeholders and what kind of values they perceive being created in these relationships. And then I went to 30 of those stakeholders and tried to understand how they perceived the relationship and what kinds of value they perceived. And in an effort to explore how the social dynamics of those relationships frame the value creation opportunities. So, like I said, they have thousands of stakeholders. I explored some of the salient ones, and I've got 8 minutes to give you the key findings from a 3-year PhD, so bear with me. Before I dive into those high-level findings, I just wanted to give you a very quick introduction to the analytic lens that I use to analyze those relationships. So I framed power and power relationships from a constructive perspective. So from the view that power doesn't need to be something that's perceived as a negative, but that organizations, particularly sustainability pioneers like Adnams, have influence. They have the capacity to create ripple effects within the networks they are based. And I developed this analytic lens based on the work of Margaret Archer, a British sociologist, who argued that resource dependency is a way of thinking about power, but she stressed that resources are not just structural. It's not just a company's economic size. It's not just their infrastructure and their R&D. It's also underpinned by cultural resources. So sustainability values, sustainability leadership, capabilities like innovation and willingness to work with others. These underpin not only value creation, but also an organization's influence. So a very high-level overview of my comparative analysis of the 30 relationships. There was a high degree of variation. So I didn't say when I showed you the overview of the different stakeholders that some of those relationships were traditional buyer-supplier relationships. Some of them were hybrid buyer-supplier relationships where the organization was both a customer and a supplier. And some of those were not traditional buyer-supplier relationships at all. So Adnams worked with a number of regional actors, a number of NGOs, and a number of cross-network and industry networks. And given the exploratory nature of the project and the variety with regards to the different power relation profiles that emerged from analyzing those relationships, as well as the different types of resources I identified which were key to those power relations as well as the value creation, it essentially, what I saw was that the power relations actually don't necessarily, sorry, I'll rephrase. Of those 30 relationships, 21 of them were power imbalance, meaning that the power was interpreted to favor either Adnams or the reciprocal stakeholder, and only 9 of them were power balanced. However, from that 30, 19 of them, regardless of being power imbalanced or power balanced, were creating combinations of sustainable value. So either environmental, social, and economic, or environmental and economic, or environmental and social. So what this leads me to believe is that the impact is varied, and you don't necessarily need to have influence in order to create sustainable value. Another key insight, which kind of confirms Archer's argument, was that Adnams' influence, in particular, is characterized by both their structural resources and their cultural resources. That's not really that surprising given the presentation earlier and their emphasis on their values. However, even for Adnams, who does know the role of their values and the importance of their values, they weren't necessarily systematically leveraging this resource in all of their relationships that I studied. So next, what I'd like to do very briefly is give you some insights from different clusters within the business ecosystem that I explored. So one was an end-to-end malt value network. So malt is a key commodity, malted barley is a key commodity within the brewery and beer making process. And traditionally, these are very hierarchical supply chains. However, Adnams, in collaboration with the 3 tiers of actors, set about creating a long-term 3-year contract, which essentially created a direct contractual link between Adnams, the end user, and particular growers. And the interesting thing is that the contract could be seen as a structural resource. However, what motivated this initiative to essentially enable Adnams to influence farming practices by having a direct interaction with the growers who grow for them was it illustrated that the motivation for the maltster, the merchant, and the grower to get on board to buck the dominant way of working in the industry was because of Adnams' sustainability leadership and values. And the new way of interacting increased communication and has opened up a number of potential value creation opportunities as a result. Another key observation was that 13 of the 30 relationships were characterized by what I've defined as an endogenous resource dependency. What this means is that instead of dependency being based on lack of critical resources that organizations go out and procure, I observed that Adnams' relationships were characterized by the fact that they actually have certain resources. Their cultural resources are driving them to partner with certain actors. And the reason it's driving them to partner with certain actors who share their cultural values is because it enables them to maintain their legitimacy as a sustainability pioneer and essentially maintain the value of those resources. I also observed within these relationships that sustainability-oriented innovations were more likely or were coming from these relationships as opposed to the others, which were not characterized by this alignment with regards to sustainability values. And lastly, Adnams' influence in their region. So I observed that they have a direct value creation strategy where they grow local brands around them. However, they also have an indirect value creation strategy, which is through working with regional and local government agencies, as well as cross-sector industry networks, to mainstream sustainability values within the region. And what this does is not only it enables them to shape investment in the region, but the mainstreaming of sustainability values means that they are creating an environment where sustainability values are recognized, and essentially organizations like themselves, as well as the SMEs around them, have a competitive advantage as a result of their activities. Another aspect of these value creation strategies is what I've called an approach which is essentially paying it forward. So Adnams are working with all these partners, knowing that in the future they are likely to get benefit from these initiatives. However, they don't know when exactly they're going to capture the value or in what form it will be. And very lastly, I'm slightly running over time. I just wanted to wrap up by stressing the point that power's impact on value creation is varied. So you don't have to be a large player in order to create sustainable value. Cultural resources are really important. And identifying new value creation opportunities, it's important to focus on what value is being created, how it's being created, and whether it's being created directly and or indirectly through which key relationships. And I believe these ideas around power dependency and influence are of relevance to the circular economy. And I'll be exploring this tomorrow in a taster workshop, which is part of the circularity toolkit, which my colleague Fenna Blomsema and I have developed. Thank you. Thank you.